am not early, nor am I late. I stream precisely when I mean to. Well, okay, maybe that's not true. But still, I couldn't resist a chance to quote Gandalf. So, give me that one. Maybe. Did, after all, have to make up for Friday. The power outage. Although, not my fault. Not my fault at all. I did not break the power supply. I wonder. I'll try something real quick. Ruh-roh. Well, I tried. I don't know if we're going to be able to have a Sisyphus. It's not looking good. But I've got at least some of you, and I've got a nice hot pot of tea and a book to read. Maybe some games to play afterward. So, not a bad way to start the day. Even if the Sisyphus isn't working, and even if that's stressing me out a bit. Anyway, wherever you are, whatever time it is, it's obviously bedtime. I, of course, am obvious. I'm very glad to have you here as we make up for our missed session from Friday and read a little bit more of Black Beauty. Things had taken a bit of a darker turn for our eponymous stallion. And he'd come under the hands of some less kind and considerate masters. Or I suppose mistress in this case would be the real issue. In any case, let's go ahead and roll right into it. I'll be reading about an hour today, as has been our usual. Then we'll work into getting back up to our 2-hour format over the coming week. Let me pour my tea and then we will begin. How it ended. It must have been nearly midnight when I heard at a great distance the sound of a horse's feet. Sometimes the sound died away. Then it grew clearer again and nearer. The road to Earl's Hall led through plantations that belonged to the Earl. The sound came in that direction, and I hoped it might be someone coming in search of us. As the sound came nearer and nearer, I was almost sure I could distinguish Ginger's step. A little nearer still, and I could tell she was in the dog-cart. I neighed loudly and was overjoyed to hear an answering neigh from Ginger, and men's voices. We came slowly over the stones, and stopped at the dark figure that lay upon the ground. One of the men jumped out, and stooped down over it. "It is Reuben," he said, "and he does not stir." The other man followed, and bent over him. "He's dead," he said. "Feel how cold his hands are." They raised him up, but there was no life, and his hair was soaked with blood. They laid him down again and came and looked at me. They soon saw my cut knees. Why, the horse has been down and thrown him. Who would have thought the black horse would have done that? Nobody thought he could fall. Reuben must have been lying here for hours. Odd, too, that the horse has not moved from the place. Robert then attempted to lead me forward. I made a step and almost fell again. Hullo! He's bad in his foot as well as his knees. Look here, his hoof is cut all to pieces. He might well come down, poor fellow. I tell you what, Ned, I'm afraid it hasn't been all right, all right with Reuben. Just think of him riding a horse over these stones without a shoe. Why, if he had been in his right senses, he would just as soon have tried to ride him over the moon. I'm afraid it has been the old thing over again. Poor Susan. She looked awfully pale when she came to my house to ask if he had not come home. She made believe she was not a bit anxious, and talked of a lot of things that might have kept him. But for all that, she begged me to go and meet him. But what must we do? There's the horse to get home as well as the body, and that will be no easy matter. Then followed a conversation between them, till it was agreed that Robert, as the groom, should lead me, and that Ned must take the body. It was a hard job to get it into the dog cart, for there was no one to hold Ginger. But she knew, as well as I did, what was going on, and stood as still as a stone. I noticed that, because, if she had a fault, it was that she was impatient in standing. Ned started off very slowly with his sad load, and Robert came and looked at my foot again. Then he took his handkerchief and bound it closely round, and so he led me home. I shall never forget that night walk. It was more than 3 miles. Robert led me on very slowly, and I limped and hobbled on as well as I could, with great pain. I am sure he was sorry for me, for he often patted and encouraged me, talking to me in a pleasant voice. At last, I reached my own box and had some corn, and after Robert had wrapped up my knees in wet cloths, he tied up my foot in a bran poultice to draw out the heat, and cleanse it before the horse doctor saw it in the morning. And I managed to get myself down on the straw, and slept in spite of the pain. The next day, after the farrier had examined my wounds, he said he hoped the joint was not injured, and if so, I should not be spoiled for work, but I should never lose the blemish. I believe they did the best to make a good cure, but it was a long and painful one. Proud flesh, as they called it, came up in my knees and was burnt out with caustic. But when at last it was healed, they put a blistering fluid over the front of both knees to bring all the hair off. They had some reason for this, and I suppose it was all right. As Smith's death had been so sudden, and no one was there to see it, there was an inquest held. The landlord and ostler at the White Lion, with several other people, gave evidence that he was intoxicated when he started from the inn. The keeper of the toll gate said he rode at a hard gallop through the gate, and my shoe was picked up amongst the stones, so that the case was quite plain to them, and I was cleared of all blame. Everybody pitied Susan. She was nearly out of her mind. She kept saying over and over again, "Oh, he was so good, so good. It was all that cursed drink. Why will they sell that cursed drink? Oh, Reuben, Reuben!" She went on till after he was buried, and then, as she had no home or relations, she, with her 6 little children, were obliged once more to leave the pleasant home by the tall oak trees and go into that great, gloomy Union House. Ruined and going downhill. As soon as my knees were sufficiently healed, I was turned into a small meadow for a month or 2. No other creature was there, and though I enjoyed the liberty and the sweet grass, yet I had been so long used to society that I felt very lonely. Ginger and I had become fast friends, and now I missed her company extremely. I often neighed when I heard horses' feet passing in the road, but I seldom got an answer. Till one morning the gate was opened, and who should come in but dear old Ginger. The man slipped off her halter and left her there. With a joyful whinny I trotted up to her. We were both glad to meet, but I soon found that it was not for our pleasure that she was brought to be with me. Her story would be too long to tell, but the end of it was that she had been ruined by hard riding, and was now turned off to see what rest would do. Lord George was young, and would take no warning. He was a hard rider, and would hunt whenever he could get the chance, quite careless of his horse. Soon after I left the stable, there was a steeplechase, and he determined to ride. Though the groom told him that she was a little strained and was not fit for the race, he did not believe it, and on the day of the race urged Ginger to keep up with the foremost riders. With her high spirit, she strained herself to the utmost. She came in with the first 3 horses, but her wind was touched, besides which he was too heavy for her, and her back was strained. And so, she said, here we are, ruined in the prime of our youth and strength. You by a drunkard, and I by a fool. It was very hard. We both felt in ourselves that we were not what we had been. However, that did not spoil the pleasure we had in each other's company. We did not gallop about as we once did, but we used to feed and lie down together, and stand for hours under one of the shady lime trees, with our heads close to each other, and so we passed our time till the family returned from town. One day we saw the Earl come into the meadow, and York was with him. Seeing who it was, we stood under our lime tree, and let them come up to us. They examined us carefully. The Earl seemed much annoyed. There is 300 pounds flung away for no earthly use, said he. But what I care most for is that these horses of my old friend, who thought they would find a good home with me, are ruined. The mare shall have a 12-month's run, and we shall see what they will do for her. But the black one, he must be sold. 'Tis a great pity, but I could not have knees like these in my stables. No, my lord, of course not, said York. But he might get a place where appearance is not of much consequence, and still be well treated. I know a man in Bath, the master of some livery stables, who often wants a good horse at a low figure. I know he looks well after his horses. The inquest cleared the horse's character, and your lordship's recommendation, or mine, would be sufficient warrant for him. You had better write to him, York. I should be more particular about the place than the money he would fetch. After this they left us. They'll soon take you away, said Ginger, and I shall lose the only friend I have, and most likely we shall never see each other again. 'Tis a hard world. About a week after this, Robert came into the field with a halter, which he slipped over my head and led me away. There was no leave-taking of Ginger. We neighed to each other as I was led off, and she trotted anxiously along by the hedge, calling to me as long as she could hear the sound of my feet. Through the recommendation of York, I was bought by the master of the livery stables. I had to go by train, which was new to me, and required a good deal of courage the first time. But as I found the puffing, rushing, whistling, and more than all, the trembling of the horse box in which I stood did me no real harm, I soon took it quietly. When I reached the end of my journey, I found myself in a tolerably comfortable stable, and well attended to. These stables were not so airy and pleasant as those I had been used to. The stalls were laid on a slope instead of being level, and as my head was kept tied to the manger, I was obliged always to stand on the slope, which was very fatiguing. Men do not seem to know yet that horses can do more work if they can stand comfortably and can turn about. However, I was well fed and well cleaned, and on the whole, I think our master took as much care of us as he could. He kept a good many horses and carriages of different kinds, for hire. Sometimes his own men drove them. At others, the horse and chaise were let to gentlemen or ladies, who drove themselves. A job horse and his drivers. Hitherto I had always been driven by people who at least knew how to drive, but in this place I was to get my experience of all the different kinds of bad and ignorant driving to which we horses are subjected. For I was a job horse, and was let out to all sorts of people who wished to hire me, and I was good-tempered and gentle. I think I was oftener let out to the ignorant drivers, more than some of the other horses, because I could be depended upon. It would take a long time to tell all the different styles in which I was driven, but I will mention a few of them. First, there were the tight-rein drivers, men who seemed to think that all depended on holding the reins as hard as they could, never relaxing the pull on the horse's mouth, or giving him the least liberty of movement. They are always talking about keeping the horse well in hand and holding a horse up, just as if a horse was not made to hold himself up. Some poor broken-down horses, whose mouths have been made hard and insensible by just such drivers as these, may, perhaps, find some support in it. But for a horse who can depend upon its own legs, and who has a tender mouth and is easily guided, it is not only tormenting, but it is stupid. Then there are the loose rein drivers, who let the reins lie easily on our backs, and their own hand rest lazily on their knees. Of course, such gentlemen have no control over a horse if anything happens suddenly. If a horse shies or starts or stumbles, they are nowhere, and cannot help the horse or themselves till the mischief is done. Of course, for myself, I had no objection to it, as I was not in the habit either of starting or stumbling, and had only been used to depend on my driver for guidance and encouragement. Still, one likes to feel the rein a little in going downhill, and likes to know that one's driver is not gone to sleep. Besides, a slovenly way of driving gets a horse into bad and often lazy habits, and when he changes hands, he has to be whipped out of them with more or less pain and trouble. Squire Gordon always kept us to our best paces and our best manners. He said that spoiling a horse and letting him get into bad habits was just as cruel as spoiling a child, and both had to suffer for it afterwards. Besides, these drivers are often careless altogether, and will attend to anything else rather than their horses. I went out in the phaeton one day with one of them. He had a lady and 2 children behind. He flopped the reins about as we started, and of course gave me several unmeaning cuts with the whip, though I was fairly off. There had been a good deal of road mending going on, and even where the stones were not freshly laid down, there were a great many loose ones about. My driver was laughing and joking with the lady and the children, and talking about the country to the right and the left, but he never thought it worth while to keep an eye on his horse, or to drive on the smoothest parts of the road, and so it easily happened that I got a stone in one of my forefeet. Now, if Mr. Gordon, or John, or, in fact, any good driver had been there, he would have seen that something was wrong before I had gone 3 paces. Or even if it had been dark, a practiced hand would have felt by the rein that there was something wrong in the step, and they would have got down and picked out the stone. But this man went on laughing and talking, whilst at every step the stone became more and more firmly wedged between my shoe and the frog of my foot. The stone was sharp on the inside and round on the outside, which, as everyone knows, is the most dangerous kind that a horse can pick up, at the same time cutting his foot and making him most liable to stumble and fall. Whether the man was partly blind or only very careless, I couldn't say, but he drove me with that stone in my foot for a good half-mile before he saw anything. By that time I was going so lame with the pain that at last he saw it and called out, "Well, here's a go. Why, they have sent us out with a lame horse. What a shame." He then chucked the reins and flipped about with the whip, saying, "Now then, it's no use playing the old soldier with me. There's the journey to go, and it's no use turning lame and lazy." Just at this time, a farmer came riding up on a brown cob. He lifted his hat and pulled up. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said, "but I think there is something the matter with your horse. He goes very much as if he had a stone in his shoe. If you will allow me, I will look at his feet. These loose scattered stones are confounded dangerous things for the horses." "He's a hired horse," said my driver. "I don't know what's the matter with him, but it's a great shame to send out a lame beast like this." The farmer dismounted, and slipping his rein over his arm, at once took up my near foot. "Bless me, there's a stone! Lame! I should think so." At first he tried to dislodge it with his hand, but as it was now very tightly wedged, he drew a stone pick out of his pocket, and very carefully, and with some trouble, got it out. Then, holding it up, he said, "There, that's the stone your horse had picked up. It is a wonder he did not fall down and break his knees into the bargain." "Well, to be sure," said my driver, "that is a queer thing. I never knew that horses picked up stones before." "Didn't you?" said the farmer, rather contemptuously. "But they do, though, and the best of them will do it, and can't help it sometimes on such roads as these. And if you don't want to lame your horse, you must look sharp and get them out quickly. This foot is very much bruised," he said, setting it gently down and patting me. "If I might advise, sir, you had better drive him gently for a while. The foot is a good deal hurt, and the lameness will not go off directly." Then, mounting his cob and raising his hat to the lady, he trotted off. When he was gone, my driver began to flop the reins about and whip the harness, by which I understood that I was to go on, which of course I did, glad that the stone was gone, but still in a good deal of pain. This was the sort of experience we job horses often came in for. Cockneys. Then there's the steam engine style of driving. These drivers were mostly people from towns who never had a horse of their own and generally traveled by rail. They always seemed to think that a horse was something like a steam engine, only smaller. At any rate, they think that if only they pay for it, a horse is bound to go just as far and just as fast and with just as heavy a load as they please. And be the roads heavy and muddy or dry and good, be they stony or smooth, uphill or downhill, it is all the same. On, on, on one must go at the same pace, with no relief and no consideration. These people never think of getting out to walk up a steep hill. Oh, no, they have paid to ride, and ride they will. The horse? Oh, he's used to it. What were horses made for, if not to drag people uphill? Walk! A good joke indeed. And so the whip is plied and the rein is chucked, and often a rough, scolding voice cries out, "Go along, you lazy beast!" And then another slash of the whip, when all the time we are doing our very best to get along, uncomplaining and obedient, though often sorely harassed and downhearted. This steam engine style of driving wears us up faster than any other kind. I would far rather go 20 miles with a good, considerate driver than I would go 10 with some of these. It would take less out of me. Another thing, they scarcely ever put on the drag, however steep the downhill may be, and thus bad accidents sometimes happen. Or if they do put it on, they often forget to take it off at the bottom of the hill, and more than once I have had to pull halfway up the next hill with one of the wheels lodged fast in the drag shoe before my driver chose to think about it, and that is a terrible strain on a horse. Then these cockneys, instead of starting at an easy pace, as a gentleman would do, generally set off at full speed from the very stable yard, and when they want to stop, they first whip us and then pull up so suddenly that we are nearly thrown on our haunches and our mouths jagged with the bit. They call that pulling up with a dash, and when they turn a corner, they do it as sharply as if there were no right side or wrong side of the road. I well remember one spring evening I and Rory had been out for the day. Rory was the horse that mostly went with me when a pair was ordered, and a good honest fellow he was. We had our own driver, and as he was always considerate and gentle with us, we had a very pleasant day. We were coming home at a good smart pace about twilight. A road turned sharp to the left, but as we were close to the hedge on our own side, and there was plenty of room to pass, our driver did not pull us in. As we neared the corner, I heard a horse and two wheels coming rapidly down the hill toward us. The hedge was high, and I could see nothing, but the next moment we were upon each other. Happily for me, I was on the side near the hedge. Rory was on the right side of the pole, and had not even a shaft to protect him. The man who was driving was making straight for the corner, and when he came in sight of us, he had no time to pull over to his own side. The whole shock came upon Rory. The gig shaft ran right into the chest, making him stagger back with a cry that I shall never forget. The other horse was thrown upon his haunches, and one shaft broken. It turned out that it was a horse from our own stables, with the high-wheeled gig that the young men were so fond of. The driver was one of those random, ignorant fellows who don't even know what is their own side of the road, or if they know, don't care. And there was poor Rory with his flesh torn open and bleeding, and the blood streaming down. They said if it had been a little more to one side, it would have killed him, and a good thing for him, poor fellow, if it had. As it was a long time before the wound healed, and then he was sold for coal carting, and what that is, up and down those steep hills, only horses know. Some of the sights I saw there, where a horse had to come downhill with a heavily loaded two-wheeled cart behind him, on which no drag could be placed, made me sad even now to think of. After Rory was disabled, I often went in the carriage with a mare named Peggy, who stood in the stall next to mine. She was a strong, well-made animal of a bright dun color, beautifully dappled, and with a dark brown mane and tail. There was no high breeding about her, but she was very pretty and remarkably sweet-tempered and willing. Still, there was an anxious look about her eye, by which I knew that she had had some trouble. The first time we went out together, I thought she had a very odd pace. She seemed to go partly in a trot, partly in a canter, 3 or 4 paces, and then to make a little jump forward. It was very unpleasant for any horse who pulled with her, and made me quite fidgety. When we got home, I asked her what made her go in that odd, awkward way. "Ah," she said in a troubled manner, "I know my paces are very bad, but what can I do? It really is not my fault. It's just because my legs are so short. I stand nearly as high as you, but your legs are a good 3 inches longer above your knees than mine. And of course, you can take a much longer step and go much faster. You see, I did not make myself. I wish I could have done so. I would have had long legs then. All my troubles come from my short legs," said Peggy in a desponding tone. "But how is it," I said, "when you are so strong and good-tempered and willing?" "Why, you see," said she, "men will go so fast, and if one can't keep up to the other horses, it is nothing but whip, whip, whip all the time. And so I have had to keep up as I could, and have got into this ugly shuffling pace. It was not always so. When I lived with my first master, I always went a good regular trot, but then he was not in such a hurry. He was a young clergyman in the country, and a good kind master he was. He had 2 churches, a good way apart, and a great deal of work, but he never scolded or whipped me for not going faster. He was very fond of me. I only wish I was with him now, but he had to leave and go to a large town, and then I was sold to a farmer. Some farmers, you know, are capital masters, but I think this one was a low sort of man. He cared nothing about good horses or good driving. He only cared for going fast. I went as fast as I could, but that would not do, and he was always whipping. So I got into this way of making a spring forward to keep up. On market nights he used to stay very late at the inn, and then drive home at a gallop. One dark night he was galloping home as usual, when all on a sudden the wheel came against some great heavy thing in the road, and turned the gig over in a minute. He was thrown out, and his arm broken, some of his ribs, I think. At any rate, it was the end of my living with him, and I was not sorry. But you see it will be the same everywhere for me, if men must go fast. I wish my legs were longer. Sorry, part of the book just disintegrated on me a little bit. Guess that's what I get for reading such an old copy. Poor Peggy. I was very sorry for her, and I could not comfort her, for I knew how hard it was upon slow-paced horses to be put with fast ones. All the whipping comes to their share, and they can't help it. She was often used at the phaeton, and was very much liked by some of the ladies, because she was so gentle. And some time after this she was sold to 2 ladies who drove themselves, and wanted a safe, good horse. I met her several times out in the country, going a good steady pace, and looking as gay and contented as a horse could be. I was very glad to see her, for she deserved a good place. Yep, it is. You're right, Sparky. Also glad you're here. After she left us, another horse came in her stead. He was young and had a bad name for shying and starting, by which he had lost a good place. I asked him what made him shy. "Well, I hardly know," he said. "I was timid when I was young, and was a good deal frightened several times, and if I saw anything strange I used to turn and look at it. You see, with our blinkers one can't see or understand what a thing is unless one looks round. And then my master always gave me a whipping, which of course made me start on, and did not make me less afraid. I think if he would have let me just look at things quietly, and see that there was nothing to hurt me, it would have been all right, and I should have got used to them. One day an old gentleman was riding with him, and a large piece of white paper or rag blew across just on one side of me. I shied and started forward. My master, as usual, whipped me smartly, but the old man cried out, You're wrong. You're wrong. You should never whip a horse for shying. He shies because he is frightened, and you only frighten him more and make the habit worse. So, I suppose all men don't do so. I am sure I don't want to shy for the sake of it, but how should one know what is dangerous and what is not, if one is never allowed to get used to anything? I am never afraid of what I know. Now, I was brought up in a park where there were deer. Of course, I knew them as well as I did a sheep or a cow, but they are not common, and I know many sensible horses who are frightened at them and who kick up quite a shindy before they will pass a paddock where there are deer. I knew what my companion said was true, and I wished that every young horse had as good masters as Farmer Gray and Squire Gordon. Of course, we sometimes came in for good driving here. I remember one morning I was put into a light gig and taken to a house in Pulteney Street. 2 gentlemen came out. The taller of them came round to my head. He looked at the bit and bridle and just shifted the collar with his hand to see if it fitted comfortably. "Do you consider this horse wants a curb?" he said to the ostler. "Well," said the man, "I should say he would go just as well without. He has an uncommon good mouth, and though he has a fine spirit, he has no vice. But we generally find people like the curb." "I don't like it," said the gentleman. "Be so good as to take it off, and put the rein in at the cheek. An easy mouth is a great thing on a long journey. Is it not, old fellow?" he said, patting my neck. Then he took the reins, and they both got up. I can remember now how quietly he turned me around, and then, with a light feel of the rein, and drawing the whip gently across my back, we were off. I arched my neck and set off at my best pace. I found I had someone behind me who knew how a good horse ought to be driven. It seemed like old times again, and made me feel quite gay. This gentleman took a great liking to me, and after trying me several times with the saddle, he prevailed upon my master to sell me to a friend of his who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. And so it came to pass that in the summer I was sold to Mr. Barry. A thief. My new master was an unmarried man. He lived at Bath and was much engaged in business. His doctor advised him to take horse exercise, and for this purpose he bought me. He hired a stable at a short distance from his lodgings, and engaged a man named Filcher as groom. My master knew very little about horses, but he treated me well, and I should have had a good and easy place, but for circumstances of which he was ignorant. He ordered the best hay with plenty of oats, crushed beans and bran, with vetches or rye grass, as the man might think needful. I heard the master give the order, so I knew there was plenty of good food, and I thought I was well off. For a few days, all went on well. I found that my groom understood his business. He kept the stable clean and airy, and he groomed me thoroughly, and was never otherwise than gentle. He had been an ostler in one of the great hotels in Bath. He had given that up, and now cultivated fruit and vegetables for the market, and his wife bred and fattened poultry and rabbits for sale. After a while, it seemed to me that my oats came very short. I had the beans, but bran was mixed with them instead of oats, of which there were very few. Certainly not more than a quarter of what there should have been. In 2 or 3 weeks this began to tell upon my strength and spirits. The grass food, though very good, was not the thing to keep up my condition without corn. However, I could not complain, nor make known my wants. So it went on for about 2 months, and I wondered my master did not see that something was the matter. However, one afternoon he rode out into the country to see a friend of his, a gentleman farmer who lived on the way to Wells. This gentleman had a very quick eye for horses, and after he had welcomed his friend, he said, casting his eye over me, "It seems to me, Barry, that your horse does not look so well as he did when you first had him. Has he been well?" "Yes, I believe so," said my master, "but he is not nearly so lively as he was. My groom tells me that horses are always dull and weak in the autumn, and that I must expect it." "Autumn? Fiddlesticks," said the farmer. "Why, this is only August, and with your light work and good food, he ought not to go down like this, even if it was autumn. How do you feed him?" My master told him. The other shook his head slowly and began to feel me over. "I can't say who eats your corn, my dear fellow, but I am much mistaken if your horse gets it. Have you ridden him very fast?" "No, very gently." "Then just put your hand here," said he, passing his hand over my neck and shoulder. He is as warm and damp as a horse just come up from grass. I advise you to look into your stable a little more. I hate to be suspicious, and thank heaven I have no cause to be, for I can trust my men, present or absent. But there are mean scoundrels, wicked enough to rob a dumb beast of his food. You must look into it. And turning to his man who had come to take me, give this horse a right good feed of bruised oats, and don't stint him. Dumb beasts. Yes, we are, but if I could have spoken, I could have told my master where his oats went to. My groom used to come every morning about 6 o'clock, and with him a little boy, who always had a covered basket with him. He used to go with his father into the harness room, where the corn was kept, and I could see them when the door stood ajar, fill a little bag with oats out of the bin, and then he used to be off. 5 or 6 mornings after this, just as the boy had left the stable, the door was pushed open, and a policeman walked in, holding the child tight by the arm. Another policeman followed and locked the door on the inside, saying, "Show me the place where your father keeps his rabbit's food." The boy looked very frightened and began to cry, but there was no escape, and he led the way to the corn bin. Here, the police found another empty bag, like that which was found full of oats in the boy's basket. Filcher was cleaning my feet at the time, but they soon saw him, and though he blustered a good deal, they walked him off to the lock-up, and his boy with him. I heard afterward that the boy was not held to be guilty, but the man was sentenced to prison for 2 months. Gee, I'm shocked that a character named Filcher was stealing things. A humbug. My master was not immediately suited, but in a few days my new groom came. He was a tall, good-looking fellow enough, but if ever there was a humbug in the shape of a groom, Alfred Smirk was the man. He was very civil to me, and never used me ill. In fact, he did a great deal of stroking and patting, when his master was there to see it. He always brushed my mane and tail with water, and my hooves with oil before he brought me to the door, to make me look smart. But as to cleaning my feet, or looking to my shoes, or grooming me thoroughly, he thought no more of that than if I had been a cow. He left my bit rusty, my saddle damp, and my crupper stiff. Alfred Smirk considered himself very handsome. He spent a great deal of time about his hair, whiskers, and necktie, before a little looking-glass in the harness room. When his master was speaking to him, it was always, "Yes, sir, yes, sir," touching his hat at every word, and everyone thought he was a very nice young man, and that Mr. Barry was very fortunate to meet with him. I should say he was the laziest, most conceited fellow I ever came near. Of course it was a great thing not to be ill-used, but then a horse wants more than that. I had a loose box, and might have been very comfortable if he had not been too indolent to clean it out. He never took all the straw away, and the smell from what lay underneath was very bad, while the strong vapors that rose up made my eyes smart and inflame, and I did not feel the same appetite for my food. One day his master came in and said, "Alfred, the stable smells rather strong. Should not you give that stall a good scrub, and throw down plenty of water?" "Well, sir," he said, touching his cap, "I'll do so if you please, sir, but it is rather dangerous, sir, throwing down water in a horse's box. They are very apt to take cold, sir. I should not like to do him an injury, but I'll do it if you please, sir." "Well," said his master, "I should not like him to take cold, but I don't like the smell of this stable. Do you think the drains are all right?" "Well, sir, now you mention it, I think the drain does sometimes send back a smell. There may be something wrong, sir." "Then send for the bricklayer and have it seen to," said his master. "Yes, sir, I will." The bricklayer came and pulled up a great many bricks and found nothing amiss, so he put down some lime and charged the master 5 shillings, and the smell in my box was as bad as ever. But that was not all. Standing as I did on a quantity of moist straw, my feet grew unhealthy and tender, and the master used to say, "I don't know what is the matter with this horse. He goes very fumble-footed. I am sometimes afraid he will stumble." "Yes, sir," said Alfred. "I've noticed the same myself when I have exercised him." Now, the fact was that he hardly ever did exercise me, and when the master was busy, I often stood for days together without stretching my legs at all, and yet being fed just as high as if I were at hard work. This often disordered my health, and made me sometimes heavy and dull, but more often restless and feverish. He never even gave me a meal of green meat or a bran mash, which would have cooled me. For he was altogether as ignorant as he was conceited. And then instead of exercise or change of food, I had to take horse balls and draughts, which beside the nuisance, having them poured down my throat, used to make me feel ill and uncomfortable. One day, my feet were so tender that trotting over some fresh stones with my master on my back, I made two such serious stumbles that as he came down Lansdowne into the city, he stopped at the farrier's and asked him to see what was the matter with me. The man took up my feet one by one and examined them. Then standing up and dusting his hands one against the other, he said, "Your horse has got the thrush, and badly, too. His feet are very tender. It is fortunate that he has not been down. I wonder your groom has not seen to it before. This is the sort of thing we find in fowl stables, where the litter is never properly cleaned out. If you will send him here tomorrow, I will attend to the hoof, and I will direct your man how to apply the liniment which I will give him." The next day, I had my feet thoroughly cleansed and stuffed with tow, soaked in some strong lotion, and a very unpleasant business it was. The farrier ordered all the litter to be taken out of my box day by day, and the floor kept very clean. Then I was to have bran mashes, a little green meat, and not so much corn, till my feet were well again. With this treatment, I soon regained my spirits, but Mr. Barry was so much disgusted at being twice deceived by his grooms that he determined to give up keeping a horse, and to hire when he wanted one. I was therefore kept till my feet were quite sound, and then I was sold again. Part 3. A Horse Fair. No doubt a horse fair is a very amusing place to those who have nothing to lose. At any rate, there is plenty to see. Long strings of young horses out of the country, fresh from the marshes, and droves of shaggy little Welsh ponies, no higher than Merrylegs, and hundreds of cart horses of all sorts, some of them with their long tails braided up and tied with scarlet cord, and a good many like myself, handsome and high-bred, but fallen into the middle class, through some accident or blemish, unsoundness of wind, or some other complaint. There were some splendid animals quite in their prime and fit for anything. They were throwing out their legs and showing off their paces in high style as they were trotted out with the leading rein, the groom running by the side. But around in the background there were a number of poor things, sadly broken down with hard work, with their knees knuckling over and their hind legs swinging out at every step. And there were some very dejected-looking old horses, with the underlip hanging down and the ears laying back heavily, as if there was no more pleasure in life and no more hope. There were some so thin you might see all their ribs, and some with old sores on their backs and hips. These were sad sights for a horse to look upon, who knows not but he may come to the same state. There was a great deal of bargaining, of running up and beating down, and if a horse may speak his mind so far as he understands, I should say there were more lies told and more trickery at that horse fair than a clever man could give an account of. I was put with 2 or 3 other strong, useful-looking horses, and a good many people came to look at us. The gentlemen always turned from me when they saw my broken knees, though the man who had me swore it was only a slip in the stall. The first thing was to pull my mouth open, then to look at my eyes, then feel all the way down my legs, and give me a hard feel of the skin and flesh, and then try my paces. It was wonderful what a difference there was in the way these things were done. Some did it in a rough, offhand way, as if one was only a piece of wood, while others would take their hands gently over one's body, with a pat now and then, as much to say, "By your leave." Of course, I judged a good deal of the buyers by their manners to myself. There was one man, I thought, if he would buy me, I should be happy. He was not a gentleman, nor yet one of the loud, flashy sort that called themselves so. He was rather a small man, but well made and quick in all his motions. I knew in a moment by the way he handled me that he was used to horses. He spoke gently, and his gray eye had a kindly, cheery look in it. It may seem strange to say, but it is true all the same, that the clean, fresh smell there was about him made me take to him. No smell of old beer and tobacco, which I hated, but a fresh smell, as if he had come out of a hayloft. He offered £23 for me, but that was refused, and he walked away. I looked after him, but he was gone, and a very hard-looking, loud-voiced man came. I was dreadfully afraid he would have me, but he walked off. One or two more came who did not mean business. Then the hard-faced man came back again and offered £23. A very close bargain was being driven, for my salesman began to think he should not get all he asked, and must come down. But just then the grey-eyed man came back again. I could not help reaching out my head toward him. He stroked my face kindly. "Well, old chap," he said, "I think we should suit each other. I'll give 24 for him." "Say 25 and you shall have him." 24.10, said my friend, in a very decided tone, and not another sixpence. Yes or no? "All right. Tell little dude I said good night. Hopefully I'll see you afterward." "Done," said the salesman, "and you may depend upon it that there's a monstrous deal of quality in that horse, and if you want him for cab work, he's a bargain." The money was paid on the spot, and my new master took my halter and led me out of the fair to an inn where he had a saddle and bridle ready. He gave me a good feed of oats, and stood by whilst I ate it, talking to himself, and talking to me. Half an hour after we were on our way to London, through pleasant lanes and country roads, until we came into the great London thoroughfare, on which we travelled steadily, till in the twilight we reached the great city. The gas lamps were already lighted. There were streets to the right and streets to the left, and streets crossing each other for mile upon mile. I thought we should never come to the end of them. At last, in passing through one, we came to a long cab stand, when my rider called out in a cheery voice, "Good night, governor." "Hello," cried a voice. "Have you got a good one?" "I think so," replied my owner. "I wish you luck with him." "Thank you, governor," and he rode on. We soon turned up one of the side streets, and about halfway up that, we turned into a very narrow street, with rather poor-looking houses on one side, and what seemed to be coach-houses and stables on the other. My owner pulled up at one of the houses, and whistled. The door flew open, and a young woman, followed by a little girl and boy, ran out. There was a very lively greeting as my rider dismounted. "Now then, Harry, my boy, open the gates, and mother will bring us the lantern." The next minute they were all standing round me in a small stable yard. "Is he gentle, father?" "Yes, Dolly, as gentle as your own kitten. Come and pat him." At once the little hand was patting about all over my shoulder without fear. How good it felt. "Let me get him a bran mash while you rub him down," said the mother. "Do, Polly. It's just what he wants, and I know you've got a beautiful mash ready for me." "Sausage dumpling and apple turnover," shouted the boy, which set them all laughing. I was led into a comfortable, clean-smelling stall with plenty of dry straw, and after a capital supper, I lay down, thinking I was going to be happy. I'll go ahead and close out there, and this one on a good note. Although, it's a bit ominous saying, thinking I was going to be happy. Oh, in any case, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Those of you who are catching this on the VOD, I hope this makes up for the stream we missed on Friday, and I hope you're enjoying the book. We are about 2/3 of the way through it, so we should be finishing up in the next couple streams. So, whatever time it is, wherever you are, be it morning, evening, afternoon, midday, or midnight, I hope you have a wonderful time, and I'll catch you again on Wednesday for the next stream. Until then, good night.